Vikings, how northern traders established one of the world's first global financial systems. When the name Viking is invoked, one thinks of burning villages, shrieking monks, ships slicing through the mists, and battle-hardened warriors driven by no thought but to kill. This is what the Vikings have come to be represented as in popular media: disorganized raiders who lived for the destruction they wrought.
History could not be more wrong. The Vikings were not merely raiders. The Vikings were traders, financiers, boat builders, logistics specialists, and some of the earliest creators of the globalized economy. It did not succeed through sheer power of arms. It succeeded through a sophisticated understanding of money, mobility, motivation, and networking.
In many respects, the Vikings were far more like precursors to global capitalists than barbarians. To get a sense of what the Vikings did to Europe, one must look not at their wars, but at their ledger books. The Viking Age did not start because Scandinavians became more violent. It started through the meeting of need and opportunity.
Scandinavia is a very harsh climate. Land for agricultural production is scarce. So are the winter months. Scandinavians were finding it increasingly hard to accumulate their own riches in their own lands. Meanwhile, the rest of Europe was fragmented and economically challenged. Long-distance trade had declined following the end of Roman rule.
Bartering was widespread. Money was in use, but it was not widely circulated. Political power was local, but it was weak. Richness was centralized, with certain points like monasteries, harbors, or estates having little or no security. This disparity created opportunity. One thing that Vikings had in their favor is that they were mobile.
Their maritime technology was leaps and bounds ahead of what other people of their time were using. Vikings' longships were agile, swift, maneuverable vessels that could cross the open seas as well as inland rivers. This enabled Vikings to reach markets, towns, and trade routes that were inaccessible to their competitors.
Rivers became highways. Coasts became front doors. However, the ships were more than just instruments of warfare. They were economic infrastructure. This allowed the Vikings to transport goods, people, or silver over vast distances. One could bypass go-between parties. One could connect areas that were never before directly connected.
Thus, a parallel economy with a quicker dynamic was established by the Vikings. Silver was at the heart of Viking finance. Contrary to later periods that were dependent on standardized national coins, the Viking economy was basically based on the bullion system. Silver could be measured by weight and purity, irrespective of the authority that issued it.
It could be chopped, bent, tested, or melted. A coin from England, a dirham from the Islamic lands, or a Frankish denier could pass as money if it could be trusted for its weight of silver. This setup gave Vikings a big advantage. Their economy was globalized with flexibility. Their economy relied on the movement of silver.
This means that they did not tie their economy to any one monetary system. Instead, they followed silver wherever it went. This is evident in archaeological findings. Hoards excavated in Scandinavia, left by the Vikings, reveal coins from the Middle East, Central Asia, Western Europe, or the British Isles. These were no souvenir trophies.
These were funds at work. Raiding was one of the ways of getting silver, but it was not the ultimate objective. Raiding was a source of capital inflow. Monasteries and churches were rich in movable assets such as silverware, reliquaries, jewelry, and funds kept as reserves. These targets were sparsely guarded, but were well intertwined in their respective economies.
This is where Vikings accessed their precious loot without much of a fight. This silver then cycled back into Viking culture, fueling their subsequent endeavors: more expeditionaries, boat construction, trade, and establishing settlements. Raiding was the startup phase. Trading was the growth phase. As the Viking expeditions grew in scale, so did trade centers.
Such centers were Hedeby, Kaupang, and the Scandinavian trading center of Birka. These were centers of commerce that facilitated the exchange of goods, people, and silver. These were no mere markets of bartering. These markets were organized with specialized craftsmen, long-distance traders, standardized weights, and standardized commerce practices. There was trade in both directions.
Goods that came from the north: fur, amber, ironware, timber, walrus ivory, slaves. Goods that came from the south or the east: silver, silk, glassware,
wine, spices, luxuries. Vikings took on the role of middlemen who exploited differences in resource availability between various areas. Slavery was a dark but crucial part of this system. Raiders would capture slaves who would then be sold in markets that went from Ireland to the Mediterranean and the Islamic world. Slavery was a source of both labor and money. This money came in the form of silver that fueled Viking expansion. This connection with the Islamic world was all the more significant. During the early Middle Ages, huge amounts of silver coins were produced by the caliphates of the Islamic world. The Vikings were able to exploit this by trading slaves for goods south and silver north. Otherwise, their economy would have stagnated. While riches accumulated, societal transformations occurred among the Vikings. Scandinavian societies were flat in terms of social hierarchy, but with sustained access to silver, there was social inequality. This led to the emergence of chieftains who wielded power over their ships, men, and trade routes. It became increasingly important to be able to distribute money, buy loyalty, and fund raids. Thus, Viking politics was like an investment scheme. Politicians wooed followers with promises of returns. Sailors embarked on raids for returns. These were shared. Success brought fame, which enticed more investment and more manpower. Eventually, the Vikings recognized that it would be more lucrative to generate a continuing revenue stream through other means besides plunder. This realization revolutionized their approach. Instead of attacking settlements, they chose to control them.
Instead of raids, tribute systems came into practice. Instead of taxes, theft became optional. Historically, the Viking influence in England is known for military invasion, but it is also about financial incorporation. The Danelaw established a system in which Vikings exploited the value of fertile land and a productive population.
Money followed suit. Viking rulers started to produce their own currency, indicating the end of bullion-based economies and the era of political money with symbolic value. This practice represented a significant development, that of the transition from mobile Vikings to sedentary rulers. In Normandy, the Vikings chose to settle their homes among the inhabitants of the area, including their economic systems. It is no surprise that their progeny would conquer England, but it would be with the mindset of rulers who were knowledgeable in both war and administration. The Varangian Guard is another phase of the Viking financial development. Viking mercenaries fought for the Byzantine Empire as elite bodyguards, for gold instead of spoils. This is wage labor of the ultimate medieval geopolitical character. Vikings became specialists on the global security market. The Viking Age was ending. The decline of the Viking Age was not a collapse, it was absorption. The more European states centralized, fortified their towns, established a standardized coinage, and controlled trade, the more the Vikings lost their asymmetric strengths. Mobility became less important with more hardened borders. Arbitrage reduced as markets became more integrated. Violence became more expensive and less lucrative. However, Viking influence did not fade away, it became ingrained. Their trading routes formed the foundation of trade routes in the Baltic and North Sea. Their methods shaped the developing legal systems for contracts, weight, and exchange. Their attitudes toward mobility, liquidity, and malleable capital would become analogous to current financial practices. Ultimately, what the Viking saga reveals is that power chases money far more effectively than it chases force. The Vikings were successful because they knew their incentives. They traced silver flows, they reduced friction costs, they reinvested their gains, they adapted quicker than their competitors. Violence was their instrument, not their badge. Today, capital is the same as it was before. It is mobile, it does not like restrictions. It moves towards opportunities. This is what the Vikings understood over 1,000 years ago. Their longships were no instruments of chaos. Their longships were platforms of commerce. But their heritage is not one that is recorded in saga or skulls, but in the economic genotype of the globalized world, where money travels more quickly than any invading forces. Vikings failed to conquer Europe since they were not the strongest. They transformed it because they knew how money flows, and they moved with it.